Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty deep, pretty fundamental to like how we see ourselves in the world. It's this idea of the shadow self. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, the shadow self. It's like all those parts of your personality, all those aspects that you kind of try to hide away.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff we don't want to admit is there, right? Like the
Yeah.
negative stuff, the parts that maybe our conscious selves are just like, nope, not dealing with that.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like a hidden part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, you sent over some really interesting stuff, especially some excerpts from this book called Elena Pavlichenko.
Oh, yeah, that one. Which, by the way, means shadow if you're not familiar with Russian.
Right, right, Shadow.
Yeah.
And what we're going to try to do today is give you a shortcut, a clear path to understanding this whole concept of the shadow self, and most importantly, how it like shows up in your everyday life.
I love a shortcut to understanding ourselves a little better because, I mean, haven't you ever felt that thing where like something just feels a bit off? Even when things seem okay on the surface, there's this like inner friction.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Pavlichenko's work actually suggests that this feeling, it could be like the first clue, the first sign that it's time to explore your shadow self a bit.
And that makes sense because, I mean, as the book says, every person has a shadow. It's not like some people have it and others don't.
Yeah, exactly. It's a universal thing.
Okay, so then how do we even begin to like wrap our heads around this whole shadow self thing? Where do we start?
Well, Pavlichenko says that understanding the shadow self starts with this basic idea of how we define ourselves, like who we are. It's about self-identification.
Okay, self-identification. So like figuring out who we are essentially.
Yeah, and she describes this process as basically drawing a line in our minds. Like we decide what's me and what's not me. We create this mental boundary.
Right. So it's like in those examples from the text, you know you're human, not a cat, because you draw that line. You're like, okay, I'm this, not that.
Exactly. Or if you consider yourself a trustworthy person, you're separating yourself mentally from people you see as unreliable.
Right. Right. It's all about defining those boundaries, making those distinctions. Like, this is me, this is not me.
And what's really interesting is that when these lines get blurred, when it's not so clear, that's when we can experience what's called a crisis of self-definition.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been there. It's like suddenly you're not sure who you are anymore. It's a weird feeling.
Right? It can be very disorienting. It's like, who am I really? But the book also points out that these boundaries, they're not, set in stone.
They're not permanent.
No, they're actually quite flexible. You can redraw the map of your personality, as the book puts it.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful idea, right? Like we have the ability to reshape how we see ourselves.
Exactly. And Pavlichenko highlights a very specific type of boundary that's really crucial to understanding all this. It's the boundary we create when we reject certain parts of ourselves, certain aspects of our psyche.
So when we push away those parts of ourselves that we just don't like.
Exactly. That act of rejection, it's a key step to understanding this whole shadow self thing and how we can change.
And this act of pushing away those parts, it leads to this like split within ourselves, right?
Yeah.
The text talks about the mask or persona that we develop.
Yeah.
And then there's the stuff that gets relegated to the shadows, the unconscious.
Right, right. The mask or persona, it's the face we present to the world. It's like the text calls it a compromise between our true selves and, what society expects of us.
So it's not really who we are, it's just how we've learned to present ourselves.
Exactly.
And it's so important to remember, as the source material points out, that this mask, it's often an inaccurate representation of who we really are. Sometimes it's even like a completely flawed image.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be very misleading. So then the question becomes, how does this mask actually take shape? How does it form? And the text outlines three main ways this happens.
Okay, three main ways. Let's hear them.
All right, so the first way the mask forms is through this process of adapting to whatever society considers to be the ideal.
Oh, interesting. So like trying to fit in with whatever the cultural norms are at the time.
Exactly. And, throughout history, these ideals, they've changed so much. Like, think about the ideal could be anything from, a fierce Viking warrior
Right.
to a devoutly religious person.
Totally different images.
Right. And this creates all this pressure to suppress any traits that don't fit the mold, any parts of yourself that don't match up with that ideal. And this happens both consciously, like actively trying to control certain urges or behaviors.
Like, don't do that. It's not acceptable.
Exactly. But it also happens unconsciously. Like, we could just push those parts of ourselves down without even realizing it. But as the text warns, they don't just disappear.
Oh, they're still lurking down there.
Yeah. They continue to influence us from the shadows.
Hmm.
So it's like we create these two sides. The conscious part of ourselves, which is the mask, how we want to be seen.
Right, the good stuff, the acceptable stuff.
Yeah. And then there's this unconscious side, the shadow, which is all the stuff that we don't want to acknowledge. But the shadow is still there. It's still operating.
And that's probably why we feel that kind of underlying dissatisfaction sometimes, right? Even if we're trying really hard to fit in and be good, something's just not quite right.
Exactly. Now, the second way the mask forms is as just a natural part of growing up. When we're really young, our sense of self is like super fluid. But as we mature, we need more stability.
Right, we need to start defining ourselves a bit more.
Exactly. And so we adopt certain roles and internal states. We start saying things like, I'm a good student, or I'm a reliable friend.
We identify with these roles, these labels.
Exactly. We take on those roles and the behaviors that are expected of us. But the text points out that a lot of people kind of stop there.
They get stuck.
Yeah, in a way, like they're content with these ready-made templates. Dedicated professional, caring parent, that sort of thing.
Well, those are kind of superficial, right? It's not really digging deep into who you are as a person.
Right. It can lack depth. It's like a simplified sketch without any shading.
I like that analogy. Okay, so that's two ways the mask forms. What's the third way?
The third way the mask forms is as a defense mechanism. It's a way to protect ourselves from our own uncomfortable traits.
Oh, that makes sense. So instead of dealing with like the parts of ourselves that make us feel bad or like scared.
Right, like anger or insecurity or even just things that don't fit our image of ourselves.
We try to pretend they're not there.
Exactly. We try to disown them. We act like they belong to someone else. And this allows us to genuinely perceive these traits as not self. We narrow our sense of self to exclude them. And that's where projection comes in. We'll talk about that more later. But essentially, we cast out those disowned traits.
Like a shadow.
Exactly. And we start to see them in the people around us.
Yeah.
And what we identify with is what's left, that limited, incomplete picture of ourselves, which is the mask.
So basically, we end up defining our identity based on this partial, often distorted image of ourselves, and all the stuff we don't like, it gets banished to the shadow realm.
Exactly. And the text emphasizes that the shadow it actually becomes like the opposite of whatever we consciously think is right. Whatever our mask is telling us, the shadow is the inverse of that.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like if our mask is all about being kind and compassionate, our shadow might be filled with anger and selfishness.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But even though we try to push it away, the shadow, it still shows up,
In what ways?
Well, we might experience anxiety, guilt, fear.
So those negative emotions might be a sign that our shadow is trying to get our attention.
Right. And the text talks about this idea of connecting the mask with the shadow, of integrating those two parts.
Okay, integrating the mask and the shadow. What does that actually mean?
Well, it means becoming fully aware of those aspects of ourselves that we didn't want to know about, the stuff we've been hiding.
So we have to kind of face our demons.
In a way, yeah. And that's what forms a whole ego, more accurate and authentic picture of ourselves, not just some fabricated image that we present to the world.
I love that a whole ego. That's the goal.
Yeah. And there's this quote from Jung that the text mentions. He said, "The one who goes to himself risks meeting himself."
Whoa, that's a powerful statement.
It is, right. It's like when you look in the mirror, you see a reflection of what you're hiding, what's behind that persona. And Jung also made this really critical point. He said that we never truly see other people. We only see those aspects of our own personality that we're reflecting onto others.
So it's all about projections.
Yeah, shadows, projections, associations. We'll get into all that. But first, let's try to define this concept of the shadow itself. Like, what exactly are we talking about here?
Okay, good question. So according to Jung, and this is from the text, the shadow is, it's the unconscious autonomous part of our ego. It's basically all those hidden or unconscious aspects of, of who we are psychologically.
The negative side, usually.
Yeah.
The stuff our conscious selves reject.
Right. It's like all the bad stuff, all the unpleasant personality traits that we just don't want to be associated with. Like Jung said, that which a person does not wish to be.
And Pavlichenko expands on this, saying that each of us, we have these unseen, unacknowledged parts inside of us. And those can be things like feelings that we've suppressed for a long time, like resentment or loneliness or fear.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about personality traits, it's also about emotions that we've buried deep down.
Exactly. And it can also be those protective patterns that we formed in childhood or after like a traumatic experience.
Right, those defense mechanisms that we develop to cope with difficult situations.
And it can even be those parts of ourselves that we've rejected
Yeah.
because they make us feel vulnerable or unworthy.
Oh, that's a tough one. It's hard to accept those parts of ourselves.
It is. And even those life paths that were kind of imposed on us by our parents.
Yeah, like when your
Eh,
parents have all these expectations for you and you feel like you have to follow their plan even if it's not what you really want.
Right. If you just go along with it, your own desires, they get pushed into the shadow. And then there's those uh, unconscious fears that we all have. Those can reside in the shadow too.
So it's like this whole collection of stuff that we've been trying to ignore.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And the text, it really emphasizes how this shadow, these banished feelings and qualities, they still have a huge impact on how we behave, how we feel, and how we interact with others.
They don't just go away, even if we pretend they're not there.
Right. And Pavlichenko actually says that it can form like an independent personality within us. It's kind of like a separate entity that's operating behind the scenes.
Wow, that's a little creepy.
Is it? Well, this analogy that the text uses, it really shows what I mean. It talks about this hypnosis experiment with an umbrella. Have you heard of that?
I don't think so. Tell me about it.
Okay, so basically, in this experiment, they told people to open up an umbrella at a certain cue, like when a bell rings or something. And then afterwards, they asked them why they did it.
Yeah.
And the people, they would come up with all these reasons that had nothing to do with uh, the real instruction, which was unconscious.
Oh, so they were making up excuses without even realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. They were rationalizing their actions. And the point is, we often do the same thing in our own lives. We do things without really knowing why. And those real motives, they're often hidden in the shadow.
So it's like the shadow is this puppeteer and we're the puppets and we don't even know it.
That's a good way to put it. And because these parts of ourselves are, they're hidden, they often end up taking control, especially in difficult situations.
That makes sense. If we're not even aware of them, how can we control them?
Right. But it's really important to remember, as the text emphasizes, that the shadow isn't just this dumping ground for all the negative stuff.
Oh, there's more to it than that.
Yeah, there is. It also contains like positive qualities that we've rejected.
Wait, really? So it's not all bad.
No, not at all. It can also be things like untapped talents or potential that we haven't even recognized yet. It's just that we've disowned those parts of ourselves, maybe because they didn't fit with how we wanted to see ourselves.
Okay, so the shadow is this complex mix of positive and negative.
Exactly. And the text actually points out that the more we identify with that bright, shiny persona, that ideal image we're trying to project.
The more we try to be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. The more the shadow becomes this dark counterpart, they're kind of connected,
Yeah.
And it's the conflict between the two that creates that feeling of dissatisfaction that we were talking about earlier.
So it's not just about denying the negative stuff, it's also about denying the positive stuff that doesn't fit with our self-image.
Exactly. So I guess the next question is, where does this shadow even come from in the first place? What are its origins?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, why do we even have this shadow self to begin with?
Well, the text outlines several sources. One major one is suppression, especially during childhood.
Oh, so our upbringing plays a role.
Big time. We all have these natural tendencies, but if those tendencies clash with what our parents expect of us,
Our parents trying to, like, mold us into who they want us to be.
right, and sometimes they're not even doing it consciously,
Yeah.
but those inclinations, they don't just vanish. They get pushed into the unconscious. And that's one way the shadow starts to form.
Okay, so early childhood experiences can definitely contribute to the shadow. What else?
Well, another source is the accumulation of negative feelings over time. Resentments, hurts, fears, anger. Holding on to those consciously, it can be just too painful. So we tend to push them down into the shadow.
Right. It's like we're trying to protect ourselves from those difficult emotions.
Exactly. And then, after a traumatic event, we often develop these defense mechanisms that can become unconscious over time.
So they just kick in automatically without us even realizing it.
Right. And those can also become part of the shadow. And then finally, there are those parts of our personality that that we associate with feeling vulnerable or worthless or rejected.
But those are tough ones.
They are. And they often end up in the shadow, too. It's just too painful to consciously live with those feelings.
Right. We try to push them away because they're so uncomfortable.
Exactly. And then, as we mentioned before, there are those unprocessed fears that we all have. Those also reside in the shadow.
So basically, the shadow is like this storehouse for all the stuff that we don't want to deal with.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so now that we have some idea of what the shadow is and where it comes from, how does it actually show up in our lives? Like, what are the signs that our shadow is at play?
Right, good question. And the text actually gives us a pretty comprehensive list. It talks about emotional manifestations, physical manifestations, behavioral manifestations, even mental manifestations.
Oh, wow.
And it can even show up in our dreams.
Wow, so it really pervades every aspect of our lives.
It does, yeah. So emotionally, the shadow can show up as kind of extreme reactions, or just overly intense emotions.
Like what kinds of emotions?
Well, it could be things like irritation or anger or fear,
Mhm.
or even just feeling really down or depressed. And sometimes it can manifest as a strong denial of certain traits in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
or a strong rejection of those same traits in other people.
Oh, interesting. So, like, if you really hate it when people are dishonest, maybe it's because you're struggling with your own dishonesty on some level.
Exactly. It's like you're projecting your own shadow onto other people. And then another sign can be those uncontrolled outbursts of emotion, where you just feel like you're going to lose it.
Yeah, those moments where you completely snap.
Exactly. And those can be linked to the shadow, too.
Okay, so that's emotional. What about physically? How can the shadow manifest in our bodies?
Well, physically, it can show up as unexplained aches and pains or chronic illnesses or recurring injuries, or even just stiffness or muscle tension.
Oh, wow. So even physical symptoms can be connected to the shadow.
They can, yeah. And even things like nitics or nervous habits, those can be physical manifestations too.
Okay, and then behaviorally, what are some signs that the shadow is influencing our actions?
Well, behaviorally, it might show up as doing things without thinking.
Mm.
Like those impulsive actions where you're just like compelled to do something even though you don't really want to.
Oh,
Like
you say something you instantly regret.
exactly. Or it could be avoiding certain situations or people,
Yeah.
or repeating those negative patterns in your life.
Mhm.
Like making the same mistakes over and over again.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic shadow move.
Right. And even getting similar reactions from different people. Like if you find that people are always responding to you in a certain way, it could be that you're projecting something that's eliciting that response.
That's fascinating. Okay, so emotional, physical, behavioral, and you said there are also mental manifestations of the shadow.
Yeah, there are. Mentally, it can show up as rigid thinking, or thinking in very black and white terms, or excessive criticism of other people, or always needing to be right, having to have the last word in every argument.
Oh, I know a few people like that.
Right. And then there are those mental blocks, like when you
Yeah.
just can't seem to understand something, or you space out, or you don't hear what someone's saying, or you forget things. Those could be linked to the shadow too.
Wow. The shadow really has its fingers in everything, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And then finally, it can manifest in our dreams.
Huh.
Those really vivid dreams that are threatening or emotionally charged.
Like nightmares.
Yeah, sometimes. Those can be a reflection of the shadow too.
Okay, so there are all these different ways that the shadow can show up in our lives, and I'm guessing that the specific ways it manifests will be unique to each person.
Right. Right, exactly. It depends on a lot of factors, your personality, your experiences, all of that. So understanding our own personal shadow, it requires us to really look inward, not just rely on these general descriptions.
And one way we can do that, according to the text, is to understand what we're projecting onto other people.
Ah, yes. Projection. That's a big one. So our self, it might harbor all kinds of feelings or urges that we deem unacceptable, things we don't want to admit to.
So we try to distance ourselves from those parts of ourselves.
Exactly. And then we attribute them to other people. It's called projection. We turn them into projections, label other people with them, and then, we fight or suffer because of them. Because the shadow, when it clashes with our values, it's not seen as a negative part of ourselves.
Right. It's like we're disowning those parts of ourselves and saying, nope, that's not me, that's you.
Exactly. And so it gets projected, transferred to the outside world, and experienced as something external. But really, it all originated within us.
It's like we're casting a shadow and then blaming the object that the shadow falls on.
That's a great way to put it. And often, when we deny a certain trait in ourselves, we become hyper aware of it in other people.
So, like, if I'm secretly really insecure, I might be extra sensitive to any signs of insecurity in others.
Exactly. Or you might be excessively admiring of people who have the traits that you're denying in yourself.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, if I secretly wish I was more outgoing, I might be really drawn to people who are super extroverted.
Exactly. And another way we can spot our shadow is by noticing those times when our words, our intentions, and our actions, they don't quite align.
So, like, when we say one thing but do another.
Yeah, something like that. It's like there's this disconnect between what we're consciously trying to present and what's actually going on beneath the surface.
Right. Like when we're trying to be all nice and polite, but then we accidentally snap at someone.
Exactly. And the text actually quotes Eric Newman here, who says that we tend to fight the shadow as an external enemy instead of seeing it as an inner problem.
We're always looking outside of ourselves for the source of our problems.
Yeah. It's easier that way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually solve anything.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into this whole concept of projection. What exactly do we mean by that?
All right, so Pavlichenko explains that the shadow can be seen um, as our own potential that we've lost touch with, like it's something that we've forgotten about or that we've rejected.
Okay, so it's not just negative stuff. It's also about unrealized potential.
Exactly. But these aspects of ourselves, they're still operating, and we still perceive them, but because we believe they're not ours, we see them as belonging to other people. We attribute our own qualities to them so strongly that we actually lose awareness of those qualities in ourselves.
That's wild. So projection is basically when, like, a trait or an attitude or a feeling or even a behavior, it actually belongs to us, but we don't experience it that way. Instead, we attribute it to someone else.
Exactly. And then we feel like it's directed at us, even though it's really coming from within us.
Oh, so it's like if I'm really angry, but I can't admit that to myself, I might start seeing everyone else as angry and aggressive.
Precisely. And it's important to understand that projection is, it's an unconscious process. We don't do it intentionally.
Right. It's a defense mechanism. It's our way of protecting ourselves from those uncomfortable parts of ourselves.
Exactly. And the consequences, as the text points out, they're always twofold.
Twofold. Okay, explain that.
Sure. So first of all, when we project something, we genuinely believe that we don't possess that quality.
Hmm.
Like, if I'm projecting anger onto someone else, I might actually believe that I'm not an angry person.
Even though I am deep down.
Right. And then second of all, we just as genuinely see those qualities in another person, and we feel like they're directed at us.
So it's like I'm projecting my own anger onto you, and then I feel like you're angry at me, even though you might not be at all.
Exactly. And this whole dynamic, it actually shrinks our sense of self.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the I becomes smaller, and the not I becomes larger. The more we project, the more we see ourselves as separate from the world, and the more we feel like the world is against us.
Oh, so it can actually make us feel more isolated and alone?
Exactly. And Pavlichenko actually illustrates this with some really clear examples.
Yeah.
So for example, let's say you're feeling hostile toward your boss, but you can't express that hostility directly.
Right, because that could get you fired.
Exactly. So what do? You push that hostility down into the shadow, and then you project it onto your boss.
Mm-hmm.
So now you see your boss is hostile, and you start to feel fear.
Oh, I see. So the original hostility, which was directed outward, gets turned inward and becomes fear.
Exactly. And another example is, let's say you really want to be beautiful, but you don't believe that you are. So you push that desire down into the shadow. And then you project it onto other women. You exaggerate their beauty in your mind, which makes you feel inadequate and insecure.
Right. It's like we're always comparing ourselves to others and coming up short.
Yeah. And that can be a sign of projection, too.
Okay, so this whole projection thing is pretty tricky. It sounds like it can really distort our perceptions of ourselves and others.
It can, yeah. And the key takeaway here is that projection usually still causes problems. Whether you're directing that negative energy outward or inward, you're still suffering.
Right, there's no escape.
Exactly. And Pavlichenko points out that when you point out someone's shadow aspect to them, they'll often defend their view quite strongly.
Oh, yeah, people don't like to be told that they're projecting.
They don't. And that's because most people, they resist accepting their shadow. They resist the idea that what they're projecting actually belongs to them. And resistance, the text says, is the main cause of projections. We resist those parts of ourselves that we don't like, so we project them.
It's like anything but me.
Exactly. And the witch hunt analogy, it really illustrates this.
What's that?
Well, It's this idea that we hate in others what we secretly hate in ourselves.
Oh, that makes sense.
So witch hunts, they happen when someone completely loses sight of a trait that they consider, wicked or evil in themselves. And it's something that we all do to some extent. We all have a dark side, but we don't want to admit it. So we resist it, we deny it, we banish it, but it doesn't actually go away. It just
Yeah.
consumes our energy.
Right. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can push it down, but it's just going to pop up somewhere else.
Exactly. And the more we resist, the stronger it gets. And the more it intrudes into our awareness. But we can't possibly have this negative trait, right?
Yeah.
So it must belong to someone else. And so we find someone to project our shadow onto.
And then we demonize them for having the very qualities that we're denying in ourselves.
Exactly. And we do it with the same force that we use to resist our own shadow. It's like we're punishing them for our own sins.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful image.
It is, yeah. And Pavlichenko makes this really important point. She says that, we might dislike other people for being, for being stupid or mean.
Right.
And while it's true that people can genuinely have those traits,
Right. Some people really are jerks.
true. But our strong emotional reaction to those traits, it often signals that we're projecting something. It means that we're probably struggling with those same traits in ourselves, but we're not acknowledging it.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, if someone's stupidity really bothers me, it could be because I'm insecure about my own intelligence.